What happens when the person responsible for USA basketball selections gets caught on camera misrepresenting Caitlin Clark and her fan base? That's exactly what unfolded when Sue Bird appeared on her own podcast and revealed far more than she likely intended. While the cameras were rolling, Bird allowed guests to label Clark supporters as toxic, nodded along in agreement, and even doubled down on those claims. What she didn't account for was the fact that everything was being recorded. This wasn't a harmless conversation. This was a USA basketball managing director openly showing bias toward the most influential player in women's basketball today. The issue isn't whether Sue Bird crossed a line. It's how long this mindset has existed behind closed doors.
For a large group of people, mostly that exist online, it wasn't enough, love a player, love Caitlin, love whoever you want to love. But it was simultaneously, they had to then say that every player that ever came before was trash.
No. That is not correct. That's not a thing.
Can someone who publicly criticizes Caitlin Clark's fan base truly remain neutral when deciding who represents Team USA? Bird's comments came during what initially appeared to be a routine appearance on A Touch More with Megan Rapinoe and Katie Nolan. She appeared relaxed, professional, and ready to discuss the growth of women's basketball. The conversation started with familiar talking points: increased attendance, new fans, and rising visibility. Everything sounded positive on the surface. But the tone shifted when the discussion turned to Caitlin Clark's supporters. Katie Nolan began framing Clark's fan base as problematic, suggesting they lacked respect for the league's history and other players. Bird didn't push back. Instead,
during the WNBA this season, I feel like we sort of had one of those particular growing pains where it's like some of the people that are coming in and watching the sport and are fans of the sport feel like maybe they're there for a weird reason. And now they've found sort of maybe one player to hyper-fixate on that they feel stands at odds with what a WNBA player is in their minds. And they passionately love that player in a way that actually just feels like it's hate being disguised as love that they want to have against the rest of the league.
She nodded enthusiastically, smiled, and visibly agreed as the criticism intensified. Her body language told the story before her words did. Eventually, Bird jumped in herself, claiming that Clark's fans weren't content with simply loving one player, that they allegedly dismissed every great player who came before her. This framing painted millions of new fans as ignorant and disrespectful, despite the overwhelming evidence that Clark's supporters have elevated the entire league. What makes this even more troubling is Bird's role. She isn't just a retired legend with an opinion, she's the managing director of USA Basketball. That position requires fairness and objectivity, especially with major international competitions approaching. Yet here she was, openly criticizing the fan base of a player whose path to Team USA runs directly through her office. Bird's bias becomes even clearer when the conversation shifts to Paige Bueckers. Her tone completely changes. Suddenly, Bird is passionate, defensive, and frustrated about the lack of media attention for a UConn product, her alma mater.
And we sort of had this moment where the rest of the fans had to go like, you paid the same money for your ticket, and you being here is also helpful to the sport. And that's a really difficult thing to do. They had no sort of reverence for the fact that, like, buddy, this conversation's been going on without you for years and years and years. And now you come in here and just think that you can, because you love this one player, and this one player is very good. She's very, very good. And like, I would love to just openly love them. Those are the types of moments that as a women's sports fan, I like really bristle against, where I'm just like, I hate that we have to go through this.
She even cited statistics to argue that Bueckers deserved more coverage, presenting it as a serious injustice. The contrast couldn't be more obvious. In one breath, Bird downplays the popularity of the player who brought unprecedented attention to women's basketball. In the next, she campaigns for increased coverage of a UConn star. Clark earned her spotlight by breaking records, filling arenas, and drawing millions of viewers. That popularity wasn't given, it was earned. Bird's argument collapses when you look at the numbers. WNBA attendance nearly doubled during Clark's rookie season. Indiana Fever games went from half-empty arenas to consistent sellouts. Television viewership exploded. Merchandise sales surged. Families, young girls, and first-time fans flooded into the league, not to tear it down, but to celebrate it. These fans weren't dismissing history. They were learning it. They discovered players like Aya Wilson, Diana Taurasi, Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hull, and
I truly did not love that conversation. I don't know what that conversation adds to women's basketball, to the growth of women's basketball. I don't know why we're still bringing up a toxic fan base. I thought it was so condescending to say that so many fans are just latching on to Caitlin Clark for reasons other than the basketball. And that is something that we just continue to see. And it was also crazy because Katie Nolan at the end of this whole bit, she was like, yeah, I don't really watch that many games, but I'm keeping tabs on it. And it's like, that's the reason you had the take that you did. The reason that you had the take that you did is because you're not watching the games. You're not watching what's going on. You're not going to the games. And you clearly said that. You said, I'm a casual fan. I don't really watch the games, but I keep tabs on what's going on.
Murphy Cunningham because Caitlin Clark brought them in. Clark didn't overshadow the league. She amplified it. Yet Bird framed this growth as a problem. She described Clark's supporters as toxic while ignoring the economic and cultural revival they sparked. That disconnect reveals something deeper than concern for the sport. It looks like resentment. The danger here extends beyond one podcast clip. Bird's influence shapes Team USA rosters for the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Olympics. Her words send a message, not just to Clark, but to every rising star in women's basketball. Success doesn't always earn support. Sometimes, it creates enemies in powerful places. Caitlin Clark now faces...
Why isn't Paige, probably what people think is, why isn't she as popular as Caitlin? But do you think Paige should be more popular? And Paige deserves more, and Angel Reese deserves more, and Asia, and Fee, and.
Yeah. I think specific to Paige, you might argue her popularity and the people that are fans of her has been underrated, which shocks me.
This is a defining moment. She can allow institutional bias to limit her opportunities, or she can become so dominant that exclusion becomes impossible. Her response will shape her legacy and possibly the future of women's basketball. Sue Bird's podcast appearance stripped away the illusion of neutrality. It revealed how some members of the old guard truly view Caitlin Clark's meteoric rise. The question now is simple. Can someone who publicly shows this level of bias be trusted to make fair decisions for Team USA? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. That sense of comfort is exactly what makes the moment so revealing. When people believe they are among allies, they stop filtering themselves. They stop choosing words carefully. They stop pretending. And that is precisely what happened here. Sue Bird wasn't weighing her role as a USA basketball decision-maker. She wasn't guarding her language. She was speaking freely, confidently, and without concern for how her words might be perceived outside that room. That comfort exposed the truth.
I can't believe that we're still doing this. Really. There is this seeming desire to be able to wish or will other players into Caitlin Clark's level of popularity. And that is not something you can just make happen. You can't say it and make it the case.
This was not a misunderstanding. It wasn't a poorly phrased comment taken out of context. It was a candid glimpse into how one of the most powerful figures in women's basketball views Caitlin Clark's rise and the millions of fans who followed her into the WNBA. Bird wasn't reacting in the moment. She was reinforcing a belief system that had clearly been forming long before that podcast aired. What's most striking is how casually those beliefs were expressed. Labeling a massive portion of the league's new audience as problematic was treated as normal, even justified. There was no hesitation, no pause to acknowledge the economic reality of what those fans have done for the sport. No recognition that those same fans are the reason arenas are fuller, broadcasts are thriving, and sponsorships are growing. Instead, the narrative framed these fans as intruders, people who didn't earn their place because they discovered the league through one player. That framing is not just dismissive, it's exclusionary, and it sends a clear message. Growth is only welcome if it arrives on the league's terms. This is where the conversation becomes dangerous. Sports do not grow by gatekeeping. They grow by welcoming new audiences,